Hi everybody, it's Az here from HeelvsBabyface. No skit at the beginning of this video doesn't feel appropriate for the subject matter that we're going to discuss, which is actually this chap here, Julian Murillo, who is a former employee of Blizzard Entertainment. And a couple of days ago, he put up this Twitlonger post, and what made him do so is he saw what he believed to be some rather hypocritical behaviour in regards to Blizzard Entertainment, how they talk about how inclusive they are and how they celebrate diversity within the company and in general, and how he himself feels as if the company let him down massively. Now, I had actually been pointed towards this post, but no sooner had I than Julian actually got in contact with myself, and I believe some other people as well. I'm not trying to make this a personal or exclusive thing to me by any stretch of the imagination, and actually asked if I would go through this, and if I had any questions that I wanted to ask him, then he would be more than welcome to entertain them. So I did. I went through the post. I had some questions which I wanted to ask Julian about his experience, and he was very gracious enough to answer them for me. So in this video, I'm actually going to paraphrase this, as it's a very long post, but I have linked it in the description box down below, and I thoroughly recommend that you do read it in its entirety, and more specifically from the actual words of Julian himself. One thing that he has asked that I do, and I am going to respect this, is he did elaborate on the questions and gave some further information, but he only wants the information that is relevant to his own personal circumstances to be discussed, and I've got no problem with that whatsoever. If other people want to bring out their stories, you know, they can feel free to do so in their own time, etc. So with that said, let's start going through this post. So the first bit deals with Julian joining the Hearthstone esports team as a temporary assignment, and he was still getting QA pay at the time because of it. He worked very hard indeed, and because of the nature of his job, sometimes he'd find himself working up to 2 a.m, 3 a.m. in the morning. A position, though, however, opened up full-time to join this team, and because of the work that he had done and how well it had actually been received, he was the best person qualified for the position and actually got the role. And that involved a team of himself, his friend Drew, Trevor, who was the manager, and also a lady called Gemma. However, Trevor moved into a position in the Overwatch team, leaving the team of himself, Drew, and Gemma on their own. It was at this time that things, according to Jules, started to change. He says that his team member, Gemma, started to make some stereotypical racial comments about Mexican males, saying that they're all chauvinists because she'd spent some time over in Mexico as an exchange student. He just laughed it off, as it was initially said in jest, but did think it rather rich because he had actually followed his wife to where he was so she could live her dream working for Blizzard. But it continued, and not only did it continue, it actually intensified, and the jesting turned into a little bit of vitriol. This started to get to Jules a wee bit, and he went to his doctor and was diagnosed with depression, and later would also start to develop anxiety issues. And when it just persisted and persisted, he decided to approach his manager, Drew, about it, and then the personnel manager also. At first, he was told that it was him who was being moody and he needed to get over it. But when he explained the full state of what was going on, he was told not to worry, it would be handled. It wasn't handled, according to Jules, at all. Jules started to feel like he was the punching bag of the team, and he made, in his eyes, the fateful error of actually getting involved in a heated discussion that Gemma and Drew were having one day about the etymology of some male-derived words, and asked Gemma how she would change certain military phrases or official phrases, for example, like yeoman. And at this time, the female esports director came into the room. Gemma decided to latch onto her, and in a solidarity of us girls stick together, called out Jules as being sexist, not mentioning that the conversation was actually between her and Drew. No, it was actually Jules who was a sexist male within her working environment. This embarrassed him greatly, as it was said in front of his director, the director of the department that he's working in and the department that he hoped to be successful in. He demanded a meeting with Drew, his manager, and asked if this could stop. He was sick and tired of this behaviour in the team. He was assured that Gemma would be spoken to. She's going through some things right now, but it will be sorted. But it didn't change. Things, in fact, just seemingly, according to Jules, got worse within the team. He was being left out of basic operational functions within his team, making his job virtually impossible. And he was working ridiculous hours because of it. And on that night that he was embarrassed in front of his director, he had his first panic attack. Fortunately for him, it was at home. And despite everything that was going on, he continued to see his doctor. His health deteriorated, and it almost became a weekly thing that he had to speak to Drew about Gemma and about things having to change. Nothing would get done at all. His stress levels continued, and further visits to the doctor was actually very surprised about how quickly Jules's health seemed to be deteriorating as his medication levels increased and types of medication increased as well. Another team member was brought in, but this actually caused further problems, according to Jules, as he was now completely frozen out of meetings, even meetings that related to specific topics he was dealing with. And then he would be given the details at the last minute, which made his workload even larger. And therefore, at least once a month, he was spending an 80-hour, 100-hour week trying to get everything sorted. Even with all that pressure on his shoulders, the esport events still turned out to be a roaring success. But in October of 2016, enough was enough for him. And he decided he wanted to leave this team and go elsewhere within the company, and started to look around. He was approached by the director of esports, who told him to hold on because they were actually going to bring in a specific manager to manage this team, as it hadn't had one since Trevor had left, and see what would transpire when he came on board. However, when he met the manager that was going to take over, he went for a meal with him and he discussed the team with him, not mentioning the difficulties that he was having because the guy was just new, threw some suggestions about how the team dynamic worked and was working, and was just dismissed as the manager had his own way of running things, and he felt as if he was just coming up against a brick wall with this person, and therefore decided to intensify his search for another role within the company. It was at this time, though, that he got some pretty bad news. He was asked to go for a meeting with Gemma, and she selected the meeting room, which just so happened to be right next to the eSport director's office, and according to Jules, the walls are paper thin. He was then told, essentially, that Gemma was going to be his boss and not Drew from here on in, and she would be managing all his workload, and she wanted things done in a very specific way, etc., etc. His natural reaction was, well, this is the first I've heard of it, to which she absolutely exploded and started screaming at him, saying, what was the problem? What problems do you have with me? And also, do you have these problems because I'm a woman? Playing the victim card, playing the sexism card against him. He was taken aback by this and simply said, this is the first time I have heard this information. That's the only reason. Which caused Gemma to back off a little bit, but the damage, according to him, had already been done. She had screamed and shouted, and the office was right next door. Jules now was in fear for his job. Gemma was besties with the HR director, and with what had just transpired, he felt as if his position at the company was under threat. He was missing days off on a constant, regular basis, with anxiety attack and panic attacks, and these almost became a daily occurrence to him. Gemma's bullying behaviour continued and still continued despite him managing now to get HR involved. And during one of his meetings with the HR manager, he had another panic attack and actually had to run out of the building crying. He was clearly a man who was falling apart at the seams. No matter what assurances he had that things would get done, they never seemed to. And because of the incessant bullying and harassment that he was party to, he was now beginning to believe that it was actually his fault as to why he was receiving this. So screwed up had he become. But his health deteriorated to such a degree that he was actually placed on medical leave. And not only that, he was also deemed a risk. And if his health deteriorated any further, then he was to be committed. Before he went on to medical leave, he had a meeting with his current manager, to which the current manager said, well, we're just going to have to replace you then, even though legally his position had to be made vacant for 90 days, allowing him time to get better and return to the job. This again caused more anxiety for the poor guy before he actually went on to medical leave from February 2017 through to May 2017. On his return, he moved into a different division, the esports business operations. However, his relationship with the esports director seems to have completely flipped reversed. He did have a pretty decent one beforehand, even though she was best friends with Gemma. But on his return, she seemed almost borderline hostile to him. And not only that, during the meeting where they were praising how successful the esport events of 2016 had been, he was omitted from any praise that was dished out, and both Gemma and Drew received promotions within the company, even though he himself had worked just as hard as any of those. Not only that, when he chased up his performance review, he found to his dismay that he was actually classified as difficult to work with and not a team player. This only went to make him feel worse and worse and worse. It's at this time that Jules states he realised that he was going nowhere within the company, but not only that, he was also fearing for his job too. His doctor's visits were regular, his psychological visits were regular, and not only that, his mental health wasn't just deteriorating, it was now his physical health too, as he started to get many physical ailments to compound matters. Everything just seemed to be pressurizing on top of him. And he recalls that one day while I was out buying lunch, he received an email from his manager that said, "Jules, you messed up." And he believed that his work was meticulous. He didn't understand what had happened, and his previous work had shown that he was excellent at his job. He just recalls it was the straw that broke the camel's back. He got into his car and started to drive home, but on driving home, he swerved into the oncoming traffic and into the pathway of an 18-wheeler. He doesn't know how or why, but he managed to get himself back into his lane at the last minute. Otherwise, he would have just been wiped out. He somehow got home, called his wife. She came back and helped him up the stairs. He was, again, a broken wreck of a man. The doctors were keeping a very close eye on him now, as he was deemed a risk, and he had actually taken steps to have himself institutionalized. All of the things that had happened to him were just too much. But returning back to work, and in October of 2017, leading into BlizzCon, pressure just got too much, and he broke. He snapped and had a massive breakdown at work. Running outside, getting outside, calling his wife to try and calm him down, and then his manager and someone else came out and they tried to get him back in, but he just flipped a lid. He was just screaming not to go back in. He didn't want to go back in. He didn't want to get into that office. He was determined not to. And it was at this time that Blizzard enforced that he goes onto medical leave. In December of 2017, he reached out to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to find out what his position was in regards to the treatment that he received from the previous department that he had been in. He found out, however, that the statute of limitations on that had actually run out and it was dismissed. He felt as if he had now reached the end and almost thought about doing the unthinkable. He put preparations in place to do so, but thankfully he realised that his wife and child meant much more to him and didn't go through with the process, something I think everyone should be very grateful for. This whole business, and the reason why Jules has decided to write this post, is because of the Soldier 76 announcement and subsequent tweets that Blizzard made about their whole diversity and inclusion policies and their tolerance and all this kind of stuff, while he himself, a Mexican male, has received nothing in his eyes but abuse from the company and feels as if he was seriously let down. Now, I know these are the words of one person, and therefore we can all say, well, it's just one guy, he could be exaggerating, he could be this, that, and the other. But if you go to the actual Twitter post itself and scroll through the comments, you can see multiple former Blizzard employees themselves who are actually offering their support and beginning to put one and one together and getting two now as regards to what was happening with him at the company at that time, and offering their sympathies and regrets, a lot of them, that they weren't there for him and weren't able to help him out. Now, as mentioned, I did get to ask Jules some questions as regards to this post, and he was very kind enough to give me some rather thorough answers back to them. And I stressed, first of all, by saying, do you think that this was a typical situation about an aggrieved employee within Blizzard Entertainment, or whether or not it was your team and the area that you're in that were really the problems and let you down? And he did stress that this was, to him, a typical situation of an aggrieved employee. There were multiple instances which he could go into, but we're not getting into those specifics. If people want to tell their stories, they're welcome to do so. But there were, a lot of stories like this, but there was also a culture of silence at Blizzard, and you would find that many people that had grievances, etc., their stories would get quashed and may never see the light of day, which is kind of worrying when you see the situation that it put Jules in. I also asked him whether or not he felt as if it was somebody specific that was responsible for all of this, but he does stress that it wasn't just Gemma. Although he received a lot of bullying from Gemma, he felt as if it was the whole structure that let him down. He felt as if he wasn't being listened to, he wasn't having his concerns taken seriously, and that every time he turned to somebody for help, he was let down. He was, as you read in the post, he claims that there were multiple instances he was reassured things would happen, things would be done, and they were never done. And he, in his response to me, affirms that. He does feel as if he reached out and reached out and reached out multiple times for help, and at every turn that he reached out, he was just slapped back down again. Now, a couple of things get very specific, so I'm not going to go into them as requested by Jules. But I thought, I wanted to ask a fair question, and I said, prior to all of these events happening, was your time at Blizzard Entertainment a good experience? Were you enjoying your time at the company? And he stressed yes. In the other departments he was at before moving into the esports community, he actually thoroughly enjoyed his time there. And it was only when he moved into this area that things started to go wrong. And I'm just very grateful that he made this post. I think it's a very brave thing to do. And I'm just going to add in my couple of cents now. I have worked at a company which has a bully culture. I'm not saying this is a bully culture per se, but I'm just saying I've worked at a company that's had a bully culture. And they do seem to prey on people who are having issues, or people who seem to be cracking or appear to be vulnerable and exploitable. And my own personal experience at one of these companies was when I was going through a very difficult time. Some of you will be aware, I was about a dozen plus years ago, I was actually diagnosed with a 50-50 chance of having cancer. And I had one doctor telling me that I had it and I needed to get immediate operational treatment. And I had another doctor saying we need to wait and see. And then these two doctors just went to war with each other. And so I ended up having to go to a third doctor, which took multiple tests again and again. And this whole process took about 2 odd years. And while I was at this company, I was obviously having to take medical leave because of it and all this kind of stuff. And all they tried to do was get rid of me. And, you know, they didn't support me. They just wanted to get rid. Not only that, they tried to make things up so they could get me dismissed, which failed. They tried to coerce other employees to make up lies about me to get me dismissed, and it just constantly failed. And they attempted one too many, and they got themselves in trouble for it. That's all I can say about that. But it's just utterly ridiculous how some companies won't just take the humane route when it comes to people who are reaching out or people who've clearly got issues. This unfortunately gets into corporate culture, and when you become a number and no longer June from accounting or, you know, Dave from operations, this is what seemingly happens. You just become employee number 32491 and you become a faceless entity. And faceless entities, as I've discussed in previous videos about gamers, they don't have any humanity. So why do you treat them with humanity? But when you have a situation where you do have somebody reaching out for help and not receiving help, I find it really, really quite disgusting, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, if anyone at Blizzard would, you know, like to respond to these claims, you know, they're obviously welcome to do so. If anyone wants to come forward and discuss their stories either openly or anonymously, my email details are in the about section for the YouTube channel, and I'm, you know, quite prepared to listen, and I'll treat you all with absolute sincerity and with anonymity should you wish. But this isn't something which should have ever got to the state that it got to. There's just absolutely no denying that whatsoever. And it's I think we just have to be grateful that Jules seems to be doing well. He's got a great family and a great support chain from his family behind him, and I just wish him all the best for the future. What I will say is, though, I don't think we've heard the last of this. I think we're going to hear much more from different sources within the coming days as well. And yeah, we'll just see how things develop. But yeah, unfortunate, really, really unfortunate, but glad that Jules seems to be doing okay now. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do get a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media and Twitch for live streaming. Links there in the description box down below. And I'll be back with some more stuff very soon. You take care. Bye for now.